So what's good, TMG fam? It's your boy Ellen. I'm back with another reaction. How y'all feel? Welcome back to the channel. Salute, man. And we about to get into some more disturbing stories from our world. All right, this is the horror inside an abandoned cabin, the Yuba City 5 story. Shout outs to Mr. Ballin. We're gonna check it out. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. Join the fam. Home to silence for the haters. That's enough. Now run the lights up. Let's get to the video. Here we go.
Called the Dyatlov Pass incident that occurred in the 50s in Russia, where you had 9 highly experienced hikers go out on an expedition and then not turn up at their rendezvous point. When a huge search party is launched and they're discovered, the circumstances under which they are found are truly baffling. I mean, you had people with clothes, some without. You had people that were mildly radioactive. You had people that were missing body parts. And none of it really fit the narrative that there had been an avalanche or that they had died of hypothermia. It was almost like something had attacked them, but we have no idea what it was. And so that mystery has endured for years, for decades. And so today's story is referred to as the American Dyatlov Pass incident because you have a group of people that go missing inexplicably and then are located under baffling conditions. And just like the original Dyatlov Pass, we know in today's story what happened to them for the most part. We just don't know why. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right channel because that's all I do here, and I upload 3 to 4 times a week, if not more. And so if that's something you're interested in, I would encourage you to gently karate chop the like button and then subscribe to this channel and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story.
Let go. Let get it.
Today's story takes place in 1978, and it focuses on 5 young men that were best friends, basically inseparable, who all lived in Yuba City, California, and they came to be known as the Yuba City 5. These 5 young men were all either mildly intellectually disabled or had a mental health disability, but they were all very high functioning. Jack Hewitt was the youngest of the group. He was 24 years old. He was fairly uncomfortable in social situations and didn't do well around strangers, but around his 4 best friends, he blossomed and was incredibly funny and lighthearted and got along extremely well. Ted Wheeler was the oldest of the group. He was 32, and he kind of took a big brother approach to Jack Hewitt. He kind of looked after Jack specifically. Those two were very, very close. And Ted was known to actually occasionally make phone calls on Jack's behalf. When Jack felt uncomfortable calling a stranger on the phone, Ted would step in and be the bigger brother and make those phone calls for him. Bill Sterling was 29 years old, and he was deeply religious. He would spend a lot of his time going to the library where he would read Christian literature. Jack Madruga was 30 years old, and he was an Army veteran. However, he had been discharged from the Army after a medical evaluation determined that his IQ was too low. So he was discharged from the Army. He was the designated driver of the Yuba City 5 because he was the only one of the 5 that had a driver's license. Jack loved being the driver because he loved his white and turquoise Montego, a 1969 Montego. It was like his prized possession, and he felt very proud driving the group around. Last but not least,
You don't lie, that bad boy was clean. Look at that. Look at how clean that is, man. I don't know why the newer generation don't respect the old school classics, bro. If I show my son this car, he'd be like, I don't like it. I'm like, what?
It was like his prized possession, and he felt very proud driving the group around. Last but not least, you have Gary Mathias, who was the unofficial ringleader of the group. He was 25 years old. He also was an Army veteran, and he as well had been discharged following a medical evaluation where they diagnosed him with schizophrenia. So he was discharged and he went back home to Yuba City to move in with his parents. Initially, when he came home, he really struggled. They hadn't found a good way to manage his diagnosis, but eventually his doctor found the right mixture of medications and treatment, and he totally stabilized. And in fact was able to even hold down a job working part-time with his stepfather in his gardening business. Now, what really brought this group of 5 men together was their shared love of sports, really basketball specifically. When they got together, they were either talking about basketball, watching basketball, or playing basketball. The Gateway program that they were all enrolled in, the Voc Rehab program, they had a basketball team. And so they all played on that basketball team, and they were super passionate about that team. In February of 1978, their basketball team, along with a host of others, were slated to compete in a tournament where the winners of this tournament would get a free trip out to Los Angeles. And so the Yuba City Five was so excited about this tournament. Their tournament was supposed to start on February 25th, 1978, but their favorite basketball team, UC Davis, was playing just 50 miles away from them in Chico, California, on February 24th, so the night before their big tournament. So they decide that they want to go watch this game, right? They want to go out to Chico and root on their favorite team, but make sure they're back in time so they can get a good night's sleep before their tournament starts on the 25th.
Okay.
So they load up in Madruga's Montego, they drive the 50 miles out to Chico, California, and they root on their team, UC Davis, who ends up winning the game. Now, there were multiple witnesses that saw the Yuba City Five at this basketball game, so we know they were there. Following the game, the boys loaded up into Madruga's Montego, and they drove a short distance to a little convenience store in Chico where they got sodas and cartons of milk and some snacks. And the shop owner would actually say to investigators that he remembers them because they came in at about 10 p.m. and it was when he wanted to close down the shop. And so he remembers feeling annoyed when this big group, 5 men, come in and they're buying a bunch of stuff because it delayed the shop owner's ability to close down the store.
I used to be like that. I used to be like, but I used to like, how do you say, you want to grind my gears? When I used to be, I was 15, 16. Worked at the dollar store. We closed at like 9 in the mall. People that came in at 8:55. Bro, have your blood boiling because you can't really put them out. You know what I'm saying? So I totally get that convenience store owner. How you feel? You done had a long day too?
Come in and they're buying a bunch of stuff because it delayed the shop owner's ability to close down the store. That sighting at the convenience store would prove to be the last time anyone would see the boys alive. So that night, some of the boys' parents had stayed awake to wait for their son to come home. And when they didn't, and it was starting to get late, the parents started calling each other to ask if they had seen their son, and no one had. And so not only was it strange because the boys always told their parents and loved ones where they were going to be, but the idea that they would jeopardize a good night's sleep before this tournament that they had been obsessing about just seemed very, very uncharacteristic. And so by very early the next morning, all the families called the police and said something is wrong. So the police officer in charge of the investigation was Lieutenant Lance Ayers. Ayers had gone to high school with Ted Weir, so he had a personal connection to this investigation and was more motivated than perhaps he would have been otherwise to make sure they are doing everything in their power to find these boys. When the first few hours of the search don't turn anything up, Lieutenant Ayers decides that he's going to greatly expand their search radius. And it was because of this expanded search that just a few days later they were able to locate Jack Madruga's Montego car. Presumably, after the boys had gotten their snacks and drinks at the convenience store around 10 p.m., they would have been driving straight back to Yuba City because they had that big basketball tournament the next morning. But the car was found 70 miles away from Yuba City, away from Chico, up in a remote forest on a dirt road. The families of the boys had no idea. They couldn't even speculate why that car would have driven up that access road into this remote forest. There was no reason they'd be going up there, at least none that the families would have any understanding of.
And for me, I'm thinking like, you think they got lost? But you didn't get lost on the way there. So typically you don't really get lost on the way back because you're just retracing your steps, except if the darkness can kind of, you know what I mean? Kind of mess you up a little bit. And they did say it was late because the convenience store was trying to close up at the time, but I don't know. Something seems foul because it's hard for you to say, oh, they got lost.
In addition to the strangeness surrounding why it was 70 miles away up in some remote forest, it also didn't make any sense that the boys had abandoned the vehicle. Even though it was covered in snow, there was no indication that it had been stuck in snow. There was a quarter tank of gas, so it didn't run out of gas. There were no keys in the ignition, so when the police had to hotwire it to drive it back, the car ran just fine. So there was no mechanical issues or any engine issues. They literally put it in park in the middle of nowhere and got out and left. They looked inside the vehicle and all that was in there was some wrappers and cans and cartons from the snacks that they had presumably been eating since they left that convenience store. But no keys, all the doors were shut, one window was down slightly, and some wrappers. That was it. So the search shifts to now looking exclusively in the area that this car was found. And over the first couple days following the discovery of the car, they're looking everywhere and there's no sign of the boys. And then unfortunately, a massive snowstorm rolls in and basically covers everything to the point where it's impossible to search. And they had to abandon the search until the early spring when the snow had melted a bit.
Now that could be another thing that kind of affected them or maybe threw them off or caused them to get disoriented or take a wrong turn was the weather. Always a factor.
During this waiting period, the families of the boys put out rewards, were requesting information from everyone and anyone that had it. The police were fielding thousands of tips and unconfirmed sightings about where they could be, but none of it amounted to anything. They made no progress. They had no idea where these boys were. On June 4th, 1978, so just a little over 3 months after the boys had gone missing, some motorcyclists that had been on a long road trip happened to be up in those mountains on those dirt roads near where the Montego, the car, had been discovered. They were about 20 miles from that point, and they had found this cul-de-sac that they parked their bikes in, and they decided to just kind of stretch their legs, and they look down a little ways off the cul-de-sac and they see this old looking trailer, and they decide just out of curiosity to just kind of walk over and see what it is. It would turn out that it was a trailer maintained by the Forestry Service, but it really hadn't been upkept in a long time. And so as they're walking over, they see that one of the windows has been broken, and they think, okay, it's more than likely abandoned, and they think they're just going to open the door, poke their head in, and just see what's in there, just purely out of curiosity, because they're kind of in the middle of nowhere and they're just curious. So they go up and they open the door and they're immediately hit with this horrible, horrible smell. And they shut the door and they're like, I don't know what's in there. It smells like death. It would turn out that it was death. It was one of the Yuba City Five. It was Ted Weir, who was the oldest of the group, who looked after Jack, who was the youngest of the group. It was his body. The mystery really only deepens when you go inside the trailer. Ted Weir was found wrapped in 8 blankets on this bed inside of this trailer. His feet were badly frostbitten and gangrenous. He looked like he had lost about 50% of his body weight, and he had growth on his face, like his beard, that showed he'd been laying there almost certainly for about 13 weeks. Ted had died from a combination of starvation and from exposure to the element.
But didn't they say it was still some little bit of food in the car? And yeah, this one is racking my brain. Cause where are the other ones now? So did he do something to them? Or I don't know why the story sounds a little bit familiar too.
But in the trailer, in plain sight, were loads of fire-making materials. You had paperback books, you had kindling, you had matches, you had firewood. In addition to the fire-making material, there was additional clothing, heavy clothing, like for cold weather.
See, that's what's throwing me too. So not only was it they found some stuff in the car, and the car was not out of gas or nothing like that. Plus, inside of there, you have stuff to keep you warm. It's blowing my mind.
There was lots of food, like sea rations, military sea rations, where you can basically pop it open and you have some food, enough to feed someone for at least a year. So there's food in plain sight, there's fire-making supplies in plain sight, and also there was a propane tank out back that was basically full, that if they just...
And wasn't he discharged from the military, the older one?
Turned it on, they could have turned on the heat. inside of the trailer, and then you would have had heat for quite some time. But there was no signs that any of these supplies were ever touched. Now, one could potentially make the case that perhaps Ted, lacked the common sense to make a fire and to use up all the resources that were right in front of him. But Gary Mathias, his shoes were inside of that trailer, and Gary was in the Army. And I was in the military, and I can tell you that the number one thing you're taught, pretty much no matter where you go in the military, is how to survive. You're taught to be resourceful and to use things in front of you to stay alive. And it just seems very strange that if you had Gary in there, that he wouldn't have immediately started a fire, or at least instructed the group to start a fire and eat the food, turn on the gas tank. Those are things that are just basic life-saving skills. A day after Weir's body is found inside of that trailer, searchers discover Sterling and Madruga's remains located approximately 11 miles from where the car had been located. Their remains showed signs of significant predation. Animals had gotten to their remains, and so there wasn't much left of them. But from what was left, investigators were able to determine that both had passed away from hypothermia. 2 days after Madruga and Sterling's remains are found, Jack Hewitt's remains are found as well, 2 miles from the trailer where Weir had been found. And Jack Hewitt had also died of hypothermia. So 4 of the 5 have been located, leaving Gary Mathias, who to this day has never been found. The only thing that investigators discovered was about a quarter mile away from the trailer where Weir was found, they found a bunch of blankets and a flashlight. It seems like that could have been where Gary at one point had been, but they don't know for how long, and they don't know where he went after that. So in addition to wondering...
And I know what y'all thinking, because my antenna automatically went up too and was like, think he did something to him? But just like the other 2 that were out there and animals had gotten to them, animal could have taken him just further out, or, you know what I mean? They could have done something to him, a bunch of animals. So I don't know. This one here is racking my brain though, especially why didn't they utilize the resources that they had in that trailer?
Where Gary went, you got to ask yourself, why did these 5 men drive 70 miles out of the way the day before they knew they had this big basketball tournament that they were not about to jeopardize? Why did they drive 70 miles away onto a remote dirt road in a remote forest? Why did they then suddenly park their car, turn it off, take the keys out, shut the doors, and then hike 20 miles in the dead of night in a snowstorm to some random trailer, and then get in the trailer where there's ample food, there's ample blankets and additional clothes, but use none of it and die over a 13-week period from starvation and exposure? Why? And so there's many theories as to why this happened, ranging from, Gary Mathias is somehow responsible and that's why we haven't found him yet, to they simply took a wrong turn and that's how they wound up in this mountain in the middle of nowhere. But none of it really accounts for the purposefulness of all of their travel. If they had gotten lost, police believe they would have been maybe driving in loops. They wouldn't have just driven in a straight line, reached this point in the road, and then gotten out. It's not consistent with being lost. So we don't know why they wound up on that road, or why they decided to go to that trailer, or what caused them not to use the supplies. But something happened. Something forced them to do this. And
that was a great point where he just said, normally when you're lost, you're trying to turn around, you're going back, you're trying different roads, but you just drove straight, stopped, and hopped out. No. Yeah, I'm starting to lean a little towards that dude that's missing.
And to this day, we don't know what it was. So I'd love to hear your theories as to why the Yuba City 5 did what they did. Give me your best theory, and I'll do my best to go through and respond to as many as I possibly can. If you like this story and you want to hear more like it, I post stories like...
So yeah, that's the end of it, but yeah, something's not right. Something's missing. It's a piece of this story that they haven't discovered yet that could probably tell them why Yeah. Not sitting right with me. Not at all. But y'all get at me. What's your theory? What do you think happened? What do you think could possibly be? Like I said, I'm leaning towards the dude that's missing. Until they find his body, he is suspect number one to me. Suspect number one. Like, I don't, because it's just still mind blowing how they didn't utilize anything in that trailer. Clothes, food, heat, type of, yeah, something ain't right. But y'all get at me in the comment section. Let me know what you think. My bad. And stick around and stay tuned, man. Till the next one, I'm gone. Peace.